everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we have Marcelle Pick, the author of three books: The Core Balance Diet, Is It Me or My Adrenals, or Is It Me or My Hormones? So I am so excited to talk to you about health today. Welcome, Marcelle.
Thank you so much. I'm excited as well.
So the first thing I want to talk about is functional medicine. I hadn't heard that term before, and I know that that's one of your main focuses. Can you tell me what functional medicine is and how it is different than other types of medicine out there?
Sure. Many years ago, 33 years ago to be exact, I started understanding that if I had a diagnosis and I only treated the symptoms, I really wasn't getting people better. I
Hmm.
was getting symptom relief, but I really wasn't getting people better. So it was really a problem for me. So what I started to understand is I need to understand more of the cause of the cause.
Hmm.
So when you practice that way, which is functional medicine, you have to understand anatomy and physiology intimately. You have to understand the biochemistry of someone intimately as well. So that you're starting to ask the questions then is what's the problem?
Hmm.
And where did it start? For example, if three people have MS, they're all going to have different manifestations of that problem.
Hmm.
So I'm interested in looking at how do I understand their biochemistry so I can do something about it.
Hmm.
For example, there's a physician whose name is Dr. Walls who had MS, was wheelchair bound, and started asking that particular question. And she changed her diet. She changed her microbiome of her gut. She changed everything. So she's no longer in a wheelchair. She's teaching around the country,
Wow.
somebody who's vital and healthy. I see that in my practice every single day. I saw someone yesterday who has a seizure disorder, and we actually treated it using bioidentical hormones. And for the first time in her life, after seeing many, many, many neurologists, she's seizure free. So it's starting to understand for her what was that. Now, that I need people to understand that that's not true for everyone. But if you start to really do what I call personalized medicine, I can find out for that individual what's their problem. I
Hmm.
almost always start with the gut because the gut is the foundation of autoimmunity. It's the foundation of our health overall. And it's the key to how well we absorb nutrients, how well we digest our food, create so many other things in our lives. And so many people don't know that they don't have to be on multiple medications once we start to understand what caused the problem for them
Hmm.
and what do we need to do to individually intervene no matter what the condition. So
Mm.
it's very exciting actually because it
Yeah.
helps us understand that we don't have to be sick, we don't have to age in the way that we're aging, and we can actually be well and vital for many years to come.
Mm. So the typical method is that we go to the doctors, and I know this for myself. So I went to the doctors and I said, "Well, I have hives, and I've had them actually for the last 7 years." And I went to the doctor, and he said, um, "Well, you have a couple of choices. You can take uh, an allergy pill for the rest of your life." Um, or you can go get tested. Maybe there's some allergies. I'm like, I've already been tested because I'm highly allergic. I'm like, I've been tested. I know all the things I'm allergic to. I was on allergy shots for about 7 years, and then they told me, we can't do anything more for you. The treatment is now done. And he said, well, I guess the only choice you have is to take allergy medicine for the rest of your life. And I thought, really? Okay, that just does not seem like an answer. So when it gets really, really bad, I would take allergy medicine. And then I went to see a nutritionist and started eating differently. And all of my hives, they started coming back recently because of the huge allergens here in the Pacific Northwest now, but they were gone after 7 years of just giving up because I had tried all sorts of things and I thought, oh, I'll give up. And so, is that when people kind of come to you? So you're talking about, the person with the seizure and MS. It's like they've tried everything and it doesn't seem to work.
Well, the good news is that functional medicine is starting to take off. I mean, I was just at a conference this entire weekend for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it was all on autoimmune disorders and what we know about how do we treat autoimmune disorders in a different way because we have a huge epidemic of autoimmune disorders in the country right now. But for someone like you, let's use you as an example if you're okay
Okay.
with
Yeah,
that.
sure.
I would always be going to the gut. I understand we need to take out foods, but that in some ways is almost like using a drug. It's taking something away. We may also have to understand what do we need to treat in the gut,
Mm-hmm.
what do we need to re-inoculate in the gut,
Mm-hmm.
and what do we need to actually support biochemically, like using things like glutamine and other nutrients that really help heal the issue to begin with.
Okay.
When we have multiple allergies, we see it on different levels. We see it, first place is the microbiome of the intestines
Mm-hmm.
is hugely important. And most of us have established our microbiome by age 2.
Mm.
If you had lots of immunizations and you had lots of antibiotics by that time, most often kids at like you are
Mm-hmm.
allergic to dairy and also corn. And we have many of those
Oh.
things as kids. So we then develop more allergies and then we have more medications and we have to have antibiotics because we oftentimes those kids get ear infections. So that shifts the microbiome of the intestines.
Mm.
And if it's not well established from your mom at age 2, and we're using lots of antibiotics or other problems, that just creates more and more and more and more trouble. So there's a crossroads at some point, sometimes when the hormones start at age 11 or 12, or sometimes later on in life. And then the cascade of the allergic reaction starts to compound itself.
Mm.
So oftentimes I go back to early childhood to look at were you on medications, were you breastfed, were you a C-section, because that's really implicit in the microbiome not being as healthy. Because as you're going down the birth canal, you're inhaling bacteria, which inoculates the intestines.
Mm.
And we have
Mm.
also become germ phobic as a country. And we're like,
Mm.
oh my God, no, 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 no. Wash your hands, wash your hands.
Right.
We need to be exposed more and more because there are cultures in the world that are not as germ phobic as we are, that has very little autoimmune disorders, if any at all.
Mm.
So we know that farmers and people that are around bacteria in that way also have much less autoimmune disorders.
Mm.
The more careful we are, the more of a problem it is.
Yeah. Well, I grew up, in kind of a not an urban environment, but like a suburban environment. But I didn't have a lot of animals around, and so that probably contributed. I was not breastfed. My children are both delivered under C-section, and they also have allergies. So it makes sense that. And what's interesting is that you're saying it all begins in the gut, and that the thing that was surprising to me is you said, okay, you said gluten free, and then I heard corn free, and I thought, oh my gosh, like that's a lot, because I basically try to eat as much gluten free as I can or whole grains, but if you
But
eliminate corn, and that's a lot, right?
no, 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 you don't have to. But I'm just saying, as a child, you may have been exposed to those things when your body wasn't ready for it yet. And so you
Uh,
developed a reaction. That reaction then contributes to multiple ear infections, and then multiple ear infections contribute to lots of antibiotics. And then we're on this fast forward cycle
uh,
to multiple problems. But for you specifically, you may not have an allergy per se. You may have a sensitivity, but that usually starts in the digestive system. For
uh,
example, if your intestines are very irritated, your body is not able to prevent some of those food molecules. For example, let's take dairy.
okay.
Your gut's really, really irritated. It has something called leaky gut or dysbiosis, in which
Mm-hmm.
the actual juncture of the intestines become loose, almost
Mm-hmm.
like cheesecloth with holes.
Mm-hmm.
Then the dairy molecule goes across into the bloodstream, and the body goes, oh, alarm, alarm, alarm. Oh my God, you can't have this. And it reacts to the dairy. You're not truly allergic to it, but your intestines are so irritated, they're not doing the job that they need. So sometimes I'll take those foods away for a little while until I heal the gut first. And then some of those things you can have back. Dairy, perhaps not so much. For many people, gluten, not so much because of how they are producing gluten so differently now. But it's
Mm,
getting more specific. And what I don't want people to be is food phobic. I
mm,
can't have this. I shouldn't do that. I can't do this. So they have zero foods they can have. I like to introduce foods and variety for people. More color, the better. The more organic, the better. Good quality fats, avocado and olive oil, those kinds of things are so important. The Mediterranean type diet as well.
mm-hmm.
But for the time being, if somebody has digestive issues, I might need to take them away just for a little while until I heal the gut. And
Mm-hmm.
then I can introduce them one at a time to see, are any of them really specifically a problem for you?
Mm-hmm.
Does that
And I've
make
heard
sense?
it does. And in fact, A while ago, someone also, there's a place called near me that has a functional medicine type of approach that I went to, and they
Yep.
did say, well, you have it could be leaky gut, and so they were talking about the thing that you mentioned, where there's like almost your gut lining has explain leaky gut, but I understood it to be like your gut lining isn't fully doing its job, and there's
Yeah.
holes and things like
Yeah,
that.
it's not really holes. It's just it's not it the permeability, those tight junctures that don't let anything go out into the bloodstream, except for those things that are nutrients and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It won't prevent that. So then you start having food molecules, dairy or gluten or whatever, and the body then starts to have not a real allergic, but a reaction to those foods, and that causes bloating and gas and all kinds of other symptoms. When we heal the intestines and we figure out for that person, what is that problem? Do they have an overgrowth of bacteria they shouldn't have? Do they have yeast in their intestines, an overgrowth that they shouldn't have? We all
Mm-hmm.
normally have a little bit, but too much of that
Mm-hmm.
can cause people to have bloating an hour after they eat or 2 hours or immediately after they eat, all of which are a problem. Nobody wants that. You want to be able
Right.
to just eat and have food digest properly and do its thing so you can absorb the nutrients and have energy.
So when I had there was a proposal that perhaps it was leaky gut. I said, I think you would mention a glutamine. What is it called?
Glutamine, it's an amino
Glutamine.
acid that I use for many of my patients that really helps transition the irritation in the digestive system. It almost works like a film on the intestines
Mm-hmm.
to prevent those junctures from being too open and closes them back down.
Right.
And it's very effective. And there's a number of other things that I use too. It depends on what I find if I do an actual stool test
Mm-hmm.
to see what are the issues that person actually has in their
Right.
digestive system.
I see. So I just did a microbiome. So after I
Good,
get that
perfect.
microbiome back, I will be able to tell if there's a yeast issue, if there's bacteria, and then the
Parasites. Yep.
parasites. So those are basically the things that a microbiome that would get a functional
Stool
medicine
test.
doctor
Yep.
would get.
Yep.
You'd get a microbiome or stool test, and then you'd be able to look at those things to go,
Yep.
okay, it's
Yep.
yeast, therefore it's this. It's
Yep.
bacteria, therefore it's this. It's
Yep.
parasites.
Yep.
This, okay, got it. And it
And
could be interesting. Go ahead.
so the part that's so exciting about this, CJ, is that we know now more than we ever have before. We have tools to be able to keep people healthy. Hives, rosacea on the cheeks,
Yes.
hives, acne, many of those things are founded in the digestive system. And autoimmune disorders. I mean, there's so many different things that I
Mm,
always start with the gut, start with the gut, start with the gut.
mm,
Hormonal imbalances are a piece to the puzzle with that too. Of course,
mm,
that is not all of it, trust me. But I always get people balanced with a digestive system because it's inherently important for every single health issue, including our thinking,
mm,
because there's a gut brain relationship as well.
mm,
So some of the foods that we're eating actually can be toxic to the brain. And the bad news is we have a very toxic environment. So some people are more sensitive to others because of their own genetics. They don't detoxify as well.
mm, mm-hmm.
So those are the people that we have to pay a little bit more attention to, understanding, oh, those people need some support in liver detoxification
Mm,
so that they really can do well.
What are some
Makes sense?
brains? So this is largely dependent on the person. I know that I'm hearing definitely it's all about personalized and custom medicine, but are there certain foods that make all of our brains kind of cloudy and not as good?
Yeah, sugar and too many processed foods. I mean,
Okay.
we know now more than we ever had before. I just did a Facebook Live on sugar and I measured out 22 teaspoons of sugar because that's what the average American has a day.
22 teaspoons of sugar?
A day.
Wow,
A
okay.
day. 120 pounds a year. So I had a 4 pound bag and I said, okay, let's line these up so you can see what the average American, and I don't eat sugar, so somebody's eating my portions of that as
Right.
well. But we know more than we ever have before. There was a study that came out in 1960, and in that study, it showed that cholesterol causes heart disease.
Hmm.
We found out years later, 2004, that that study was actually flawed, and that was actually sugar that causes that inflammatory cascade
Mm,
that is what's really a driver behind heart disease. The unfortunate part, and that study was again proven in 2014, most people don't know that. They still are in the cholesterol model, which is cholesterol causes heart disease. And it's actually
mm,
inflammation and it's the processed foods that we have. And
hmm.
that imbalance in the body that we really need to change. And sugar is everywhere, and it's
Hmm.
so addictive, and it's such, you want to have a little bit more, and you start it. And the food industry knows that. I mean, they're very clever about that. So food is in many things, including cigarettes,
What?
because yeah.
Sugars and cigarettes?
So we
God.
know that
Oh my
when
gosh.
my kids were little, they would go to the grocery store with me, and I've always been a kind of somebody that's been very conscious of this since my kids were little, and that was 28 years ago. My oldest is 29, and I would say to them, "You can have whatever you find on the shelf, as long as it doesn't have hydrogenated, fructose in it." And as long as it doesn't have sugar, you can have it. Find something. They
Right.
couldn't find anything on the shelves. So they were like, Mommy, there's nothing there. And we also know that about 20% of the population has this mechanism in the brain, because we've looked at the shifts in MRIs. When they have sugar, it turns on a part of their brain. And we have mice studies
Hmm.
showing that many of the mice go to sugar over cocaine or heroin. So it turns on the same receptors.
Right.
So, I don't mean to villainize sugar so much, but in some ways I do, because it doesn't really have anything inherently good for us. So if you do it some of the time, that's fine. But a lot of the time, like every day, that's a significant health problem.
So is that equivalent to 22 grams of sugar? So if I turn the nutritional label and it says the number of
Not even
sugars.
close. No, no. It would be way, way higher than 22 grams.
Okay, got it. Okay,
So
got
it's
it.
22 teaspoons of sugar. I don't know how
Okay.
many grams of sugar a teaspoon has,
Ah, okay,
um,
got it. That's how
but
much
it's
a typical person has in
a day.
sugar?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I think I'm doing better than that.
Oh, that's
Wow.
great. Good for
Okay,
you.
good. Well, whew, okay. So we started off by saying we started about talking about allergies, and then we were talking about you said that the first line of action is going through the gut, and that the and doing a microbiome test, and then
Well, it's actually
also
called a stool test that
stool test.
looks at the environment of the intestines, including the microbiome.
Okay, and then looking at going back to your idea of functional medicine, figuring out what is the root cause. Is it yeast? Is it bacteria? Is it parasites? And then you would put together, it sounds like a program that would be either taking some like supplements, or what would happen afterwards, or eating certain foods or taking away certain foods and supplements, or all three of those would be a possible
All
solution.
three of those.
Okay,
And,
got it.
and it's a short-term intervention. I mean, I saw somebody in my office yesterday who's had menstrual cramps that have been debilitating for her for 15 years.
Mm.
And I changed her diet. I put her on evening primrose oil and fish oil combination, which works to help decrease inflammation. I took away sugar and many other things. And she came in yesterday in tears, saying that this last menstrual cycle, she had no cramps. She didn't have to lose work
Oh,
because she's always having to be out of work. So
wow.
understanding that if you go to the cause of the cause and understand biochemistry, you start to understand that dysmenorrhea in particular, which is what the name of cramps is in my world, you can actually do something and not have her be on drugs. So she's not, I didn't put her
Wow.
on any medications. And we know that also about depression, that if I change her diet and if I perhaps even put her on an herb called 5-HTP, that can be extremely effective without getting on an antidepressant,
Wow.
because the studies have shown that if you have mild depression and we have placebo, there's no difference in the outcome. So that's telling us already that the antidepressant for those people with mild depression, severe depression is a different story, but mild depression, changing their diet, intervening with fish oil and other different things depending upon that person, can indeed dramatically change their life.
Wow. That's shocking because I have a few friends that are on depression medicine, and it seems like, and they've told me about their journey, and they'll take a certain amount of medication, and it seems like the doses just keep on going up in order to. So they may have started off with mild, and then
Right?
the dosages keep on increasing, and then and it's a permanent thing. Like once you're on depression medicines, for them at least, it seems like they can't get off it. And a girlfriend I know is trying to scale back, and it's been incredibly hard because I assume it changes the biochemistry in your brain, and so
It does.
that's probably takes a long time
Mhm.
to unwind. And it's amazing to me that perhaps earlier on, before all this happened, that they could have just changed their diet.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, it's not quite that simple. I mean, yes, of course, diet plays a huge part in it. And if I
Right.
have somebody that's depressed,
Mm-hmm.
I always look at the gut. I always look at food sensitivities,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm also interested in neurotransmitter support. So I'm also interested in vitamin D because vitamin D is fundamental in terms of depression.
Mm-hmm.
Having your vitamin D level about, I like to see it around 50 to 60.
Mm-hmm.
The labs around here, 100 is considered high, and I never see anybody high, even if I have them on 5,000 international units a day after I've tested them.
Right.
So all of these things you have to be looking at because we have to understand also depression. Well, depression, why you're depressed. What do I need to work on to help you kind of get through that transition point? For many
Mm.
people, perimenopausally, they get depressed.
Um.
Perimenopause is a journey of self-discovery. Who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do for the second half of my life, and how do I get there? And
Mm.
what are some of those issues that have been under the carpet about me and my life that I haven't looked at?
Right.
So as we uncover that, as we change the gut, as we look at the hormones, as we look at adrenals, they don't go on antidepressants because they're not really
Mm.
depressed, but they've got many life issues that are coming up for them that they have to deal with because feeling depressed is horrible.
Right. So you're saying depression is it's hard to say because it could be a
Symptom.
hormonal things, it could
Mhm.
be an emotional psychological thing, it could be a gut thing. Who knows? It's part of
Well, it's
working with the
usually
functional
all of
medicine.
those things.
Yeah.
I mean, to say someone's depressed and they don't have emotional issues is heresy, but that's a piece to the puzzle. So
Mm.
is the gut, so is the neurotransmitters, so is their lifestyle, so is
Mm.
their joy and happiness and fun, so is their exercise, so is their spiritual context.
Right.
All of those things play into what do I do when I see someone
Mm.
to help them get to the other side and have unbelievable wellness and
Mm-hmm.
happiness and joy on the
Mm.
other side.
Mm. So it's I've been having this neck issue, and it's actually getting so much better. And what I've noticed is that when you're trying lots of different things, right? So in that particular instance of maybe a 50-year-old woman coming to you and saying, I'm depressed, there's like, 4 or 5 things that you mentioned that you may try. How do you know, is there, and I'm usually not very scientific. I just do, the acupressure and the Feldenkrais at the same time. So if someone says, "Is it working?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm doing 2 different things, and I'm changing my diet. So I have 3 variables of which I have no idea which variable is actually making a difference." And so, is there a way that you methodically go through so that you know which variable, or do you say, "Who cares? As long as you're feeling better, just do all 4 or 5 of the things."
No, I'm pretty methodical. I mean, I have a very lengthy questionnaire that I have for my patients.
Yeah.
I have a huge stress profile that I'm looking at as well. And I'm also looking at how much stress did they have as a child? Where are we on that scale that, in my opinion, contributes to health long term, period.
I see.
There was
Okay. Yeah, so you
a
go through
very
the
large
survey.
study.
Yeah, and then you can
Yeah,
figure out which lever to pull.
I do. And then I look to see is something, do I want to look at adrenals? Do I need to look at hormones? Do I need to look at digestion? Depending upon what the symptoms are and what the problem is, then I'll methodically do some of these tests to figure it out because I don't know always,
Right.
what's the trigger. And do I need to treat, oh my gosh, they've got an overgrowth of bacteria called SIBO in their gut. I need to
Right.
treat that very, very differently than somebody that has yeast.
Right.
So I do a methodical kind of evaluation.
Yeah.
And I spend a ton of time also looking at childhood.
Mm.
We have been very arrogant in medicine to say, the past is the past, for God's sakes, move
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm.
That is true to some degree. The problem is that we know from a study that was done in 1998 called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Event Study, through
Mm-hmm.
Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, that if you grow up in a home, perhaps it was a single parent home, or it was a home in which you didn't feel loved, or a
Mm-hmm.
parent died, or alcoholism, or, God forbid, sexual abuse or physical abuse, all of those things can increase your risk of health issues. Now, we for
Mm.
years have said, no, 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 no. It happened yesterday, God, I'm gone. And what we found from this study of 19,000 men and women, and it's still an ongoing study today, is that if you have a score of 4 or more on that quiz, and many of us do, certainly have 2, but many people have 4, that your risk of heart disease is increased by 140%.
Yeah.
Your risk of stroke is increased. Your risk of kidney disease, early death, and suicide 1,200% higher. Those numbers are unbelievable.
Mm.
Now, do you have to be in therapy the rest of your life? Absolutely not. But there are tools that you can learn how to not have that primitive part of your brain called the amygdala respond as though the issue happened, because perceived stress and present day stress has the same responses in the body.
Right. So I'm looking from a psychological standpoint, not that I'm a psychologist, but from the things that I've read, they talk about, and that there's this whole idea of holding and actually having, when a child is born, that they have the proper holding environment where they feel supported and loved and nurtured. And if that doesn't happen, all sorts of, there's a cascade of psychological issues that could happen. And so it's interesting because of the things that you mentioned, or what, can you repeat the four things that they look at again? Alcohol and
There's
abuse,
actually 10 things.
10
So if you
things.
grow up in a single parent home,
Okay.
if you witness your mother being criticized, judged, or hurt,
Mm-hmm.
alcoholic parent, a parent that died, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse.
Mm,
And you can go and look online for the Adverse Childhood Event Study, ACE
mm-hmm.
study. There's many, articles that help you look at what are the risk factors associated with the higher the number. And the beauty of this study actually says we need to understand that we need to work towards either forgiving ourselves or having a different approach. For example, let's take a perfectionism, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'll use myself as an example. I grew up with parents that were Holocaust survivors
Mm-hmm.
who were very guarded and very protected.
Mm,
And my mother was very critical, very judgmental, and I wanted to be a perfect little girl. I
mm-hmm.
didn't want her to be mad with me. I wanted to just make sure I was a straight A student. I never got in trouble. I was really organized and I did everything just right. Well, from a perspective of what that did as a kid for me, my cortisol level was always up because I was always on hypervigilant, high alert.
Mm,
As an adult, we take that into adulthood with us. That doesn't serve us anymore. It's
mm,
impossible to be perfect,
mm-hmm.
although unfortunately in medicine you really have to strive for that because you can get sued. But um, it's not inherently part of who we are. We are human and we make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So as a mother who multitasks and I had a practice and all this stuff, I had to learn to have boundaries and to set limits and to be mindful so that I didn't have that constant cortisol streaming through my system, which
Mm,
is so familiar for so many women because they're multitasking, they're trying to do really well, they're a good daughter, they're a good friend, they're a good mother, they're a good partner, they've got a job and CEOs now at the same time. You can't do it all.
mm,
And then a lot of people come to see me and they say, Marcelle, I don't feel like I'm doing anything well. I'm not being a good mom. I'm not good at my job. I'm not being a good partner because I'm pulled in so many directions and I'm trying to do well in all areas and
mm-hmm.
I'm not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's learning how to be able to do a really good job by being present
Mm-hmm.
in the moment for whatever you're working towards. And that takes practice.
Right. Right. So I think so what's interesting, I'm hearing about gut as kind of one thing that I hadn't thought about before. I'm also hearing your early childhood as setting up. I want to make sure I understand this because of course, I don't know anything about the research, but I know my own background in spiritual stuff is that it seems like you may not have and in my terms would be the proper holding environment. It sets off this cascade of fight or flight where you're constantly vigilantly trying to figure out what's going on, and
Absolutely.
and then that creates a chemical response, a body response.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
And
tell me
here's the part
tell me
that's
the
so
chemical
interesting.
response because I didn't understand the
Absolutely.
cortisol. I didn't make the
So
connection.
sure, what cortisol does then, if it's too much cortisol being produced, our body has to have cortisol to survive. It's the fight flight response.
Ah, okay, so that's what
400 years
happens.
ago,
Mm,
yeah, constantly, 400 years ago, if there was a battle, your cortisol went up. You couldn't sleep, you didn't have a sex drive, your digestive system went away, but the battle ended. And you either died or you went on. And you had happy, be merry, you had festivities, you had, big feasts and so on. Today, we don't have that. We have the stories from the childhood that we carry with us. In addition, we see the news, the wars when they happen. We get radio blasts about all the stuff that's going on in our environment. We hear tweets, we hear computers, we are on call 24/7. We have our kids in thousands of activities. So all of those things create problems with the adrenals. Well, what does that mean? Well, here's what's so interesting. If we have adrenal dysfunction, I call it, I don't like to use the term fatigue, but that is what kind of the culture is talking about. Sometimes we can't sleep at night because we're wired. We wake up in the morning exhausted. And the consequences of that are it affects how our thyroid functions.
Mm.
It affects the hormonal cascade. It affects our digestive system. It affects how glucose is regulated. So it affects our sugar. It affects our fluid retention. And in addition
Oh.
to that, our gut and autoimmune disorders. Oh my God, seriously? Biochemically, we have that cascade that happens from too much cortisol and too much stress. And it's
Mm.
unfortunate in our culture right now, we talk about, well, just decrease your stress. And what I say to my patients is if they knew how to do it, they would have done it 10 years ago.
Right.
It's not that simple. You have to understand what are the stressors. And some of those are related to how you, as a good girl, responded in your childhood. And understanding that perhaps you need to learn to speak up. You need to have boundaries. I'm just kind of using some
Yeah.
examples that women have to learn about that then changes that response to that kind of stressor. They
Mm.
may be around someone that has a voice similar to someone that was sexually abusive with them as a kid.
Right.
All those things can set off that alarm cascade, fight, flight, that's constant, that needs to be quieted. And it doesn't have to be years and years of psychotherapy. There are many tools out there like emotional freedom technique, which is a tapping technique that's effective. There's a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy that you can use actually online to help with tapping and getting the body to understand that the primitive brain, the amygdala, doesn't have to be the response mechanism. It can be the frontal part of the brain. This is today. I'm here now. That happened yesterday. The worst is over.
Mm. Interesting.
So
So yeah, so it's what's interesting is how we got here, which is that you mentioned this 19,000 person study with Kaiser Permanente that showed all these negative health results as a result of earlyhood, these 10 things that we had in early childhood, and that then cascade into stress, that then cascade into cortisol, and that increase in cortisol has like adrenal dysfunction, which just has like all these arrows pointing to thyroid
absolutely.
condition, hormones, all these different things. Um, but it all came down where our origin point was about, uh, early stress. I mean, it's all about stress. So stress, and then managing that stress through all the different techniques that you mentioned. Because so if you look at the gut, you look at stress, those seem to be like two big levers that you can pull, and then within each of those, there's all these little avenues for you to discover, like is it the thyroid, is it so those are I'm beginning to understand now a
Yeah.
little bit more about functional medicine and the approach, but it sounds like you're looking at like big levers. And so aside from those two, the gut, and then also stress levels, what are some of the other levers that you look at that have a huge impact on our health?
Environment, we see a lot of people with mold, having
Mm,
problems with mold, or people that are going to new buildings, the off-gassing that happens from the carpets as well as from the wood that's been treated.
mm-hmm.
People start to react to that. So it's unfortunate because we are bombarded with so many things, and some people are Wi-Fi sensitive,
Mm,
that we don't see it,
mm.
we can't smell it, but it's present and it's there.
Wow.
So we're being, I tell my patients to not have TVs in their room, to not have computers in their room, and to get their any kind of Wi-Fi equipment away from their bed. And people that use electric blankets, that's not something that's a really good thing to be doing because it changes our chemistry in some
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's looking at all of these things in context with someone when they're coming in. Now, each person's different in terms of, well, that's not an issue for her. Wi-Fi is not her issue, but toxicity might be her issue. We
Mm.
also have people that have what we call sick building syndrome, in which they come in, they're in the oftentimes classrooms, teachers, and they have a number of people that are sick all the time. And
Mm.
they get out of that environment and they're fine. Oftentimes it's mold, or I had somebody that had lots of mice, so it was mice species that were making people sick. So
Wow.
it can be anything.
Wow.
And once you find the trigger, it's like, oh my goodness, their life comes back and their vitality comes back and their wellness. And in Maine, we have a lot of Lyme disease.
Mm.
So that can also be horrible and devastating for someone's biochemistry. So it's
Yeah.
kind of working on what do we need to do to really help that person
Yeah,
so that
I
they're
can see that.
healthy and don't get Alzheimer's or other health problems later on in life.
Yeah, so that's kind of the invisible. All those things
Right.
mentioned are invisible
Right.
things. Like I don't know that I'm allergic to mice, and so that would take a huge amount of detective work to figure out. But once you find it, oh my gosh, that must be just an amazing thing. I don't know how you get rid of a mice issue. I guess just
Well,
don't
you
go to
have an
work.
exterminator come in. I mean, you have it
Oh.
evaluated if that's what you're suspicious of,
Oh,
you
okay. I
know.
thought they were in a
But
medical lab where there were mice. I'm like, oh, I don't know
no,
what
not
to
at
do.
all. No, no,
Okay,
no. I
okay.
mean, one of my patients had that as a problem in her building where she was
Mm,
working. So it's kind of figuring out for each person. It can be different, pieces along the way that can create the problems. The beauty is the way we have medicine today is we are phenomenal with acute disorders. If I have a heart attack, take me to the hospital, please. Okay. However, for more of the problems that we have with chronic disorders, we are not stellar at being able to figure that out
that is
because we're not
so
taking the
true.
time to
That's-
go upstream to figure out where it started. How old were you when it started? How many things have come along the way? So when I'm seeing somebody, I do a timeline. When did the problem start? How long has it been there? What were the things going on in childhood? How many antibiotics did you have? How many infections did you have? What was going on emotionally for you all those times as well? What were the big things that happened? Oh, my father died when I was 3, or my father died when I was 17, or I saw my mother get beaten at 14. I mean, we all have our things. That's not to say
Mhm.
there's no one that doesn't. I'm sorry, there just isn't.
Right.
But the degree to that, along with the other health things along the way, affects our health. So it's understanding that and the biochemical things that happened that allows us to get so many people better. I mean, I am so lucky in my practice because I hear success stories. I mean, I mentioned 2 of them today, with a woman with a seizure disorder as well as another one with her cramps. That was just yesterday. I mean, I hear it every single day in my practice
Wow.
that we can get people better when we ask the right questions and understand this is not new age medicine. This is looking at biochemistry. It's looking at nutrients. I do amino acid profiles on my patients. I look to see what nutrients are absorbing well and which aren't, so I can add things specifically for them.
And
So
now,
it's very exciting.
do you work with? Do they have to be in you're in Maine? Is that right? Do you have to be
Yes.
in the Northeast, or can you work with patients? I'm thinking about my son who's had this chronic inflammation in his throat, and he has no idea. And we've been to the pediatrician, we've been to the ear, nose, throat doctor. Um, it could be, and it affects his sleep. It affects everything. And they're like, "Well, remove his tonsils." I'm like, "Okay." Well, I don't know if that's the solution, but okay. Or like get allergy medicine for the rest of your
Where are
life.
you
So
located?
we're in Seattle, Washington.
Okay. So there's a woman whose name is Suzanne Bennett. I refer all of my pediatric kind of people to. How old is your son?
He's 17.
Okay, I would call Susan Bennett and look at
Okay.
her website
Okay.
because she is the quintessential allergist or type of person that works and
Mm,
is unbelievable about being able to help people. And for those people that are kind of women, then I do phone consults with people as well and kind
okay.
of look to see what do we need to do because there's a lot we can do on the phone.
Yeah.
But I guess the take home for me is that if something's wrong, we need to figure out why and what do we need to do to make it better.
Right. And to be fair, poor doctors, right? They have like 15-minute time
Absolutely.
periods to meet
7 minutes.
yeah,
Seven
7 minutes
minutes.
to meet with my son, of which, 15 minutes later we'll be filling all the paperwork out. So I feel sorry for doctors, and I don't blame them either. They just don't have the
Totally.
equipment to do
Totally.
the analysis that you're mentioning. So I want to go back to something that you said earlier in the program. You said, we don't have to, when we age. So I'm 55 and I'm thinking, all right, what can I do at this juncture in my life so that I can hopefully be, fairly healthy, not debilitated by some medical condition when I get older.
Mhm.
And I am older, but as I sail into, 55 to 95, and I'm hearing these things, right? Stress levels, what are other things, particularly as a woman, that I could be doing now to have a healthy, thriving future? And I hear no sugar, no processed
No problem. Yeah.
foods.
Yeah.
What are some other
So it's
things?
many different things. It's the food that you eat.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the food that you eat, it's what the food you're eating has eaten. So it's kind of going back to look at what they've been grazing on and pesticides,
Mm-hmm.
avoiding artificial colors, sweeteners, dyes, looking at the toxic 12 from the environmental working group to
Mm-hmm.
see what vegetables and fruits do I need to consume organically because they're the highest sprayed.
Mm-hmm.
Organic meats only. Unfortunately, still today, they're using antibiotics in the chickens.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't understanding that that's contributing to significant problems for you with the microbiome
Mm-hmm.
that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Being aware as a woman that you are putting many chemicals on your body that have not been approved because the FDA doesn't have anything to do with the cosmetics in our country. In Europe, many of the things we put on our face, our skin, and are banned. They're no longer allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So also being aware of toxicity around you, not using water bottles that are plastic, being aware that if you are having coffee in the morning, that your lid is not plastic, that it's actually glass, so
Oh.
that you're not, drinking the plastic because heat creates that problem.
Oh, I never even thought about that. Wow. I
If you
never even
have
thought about
mercury in
that.
your
Yeah.
mouth, that you be aware that it's not so much if you swallow a piece of the
Mm-hmm.
filling, it's when you're chewing it, the fumes that you're getting, and mercury is easy to get rid of, but it's important that you understand it's a neurotoxin.
Mm. Mm. So we eat a
Also,
ton of fish. So what's the way to get
so
rid of them?
you don't want to be eating large fish like things like tuna or
Mm.
swordfish. Those are some of the worst.
Yeah.
And canned tuna, eating that on a daily basis is problematic. I had a patient that came in to see me from New York who actually all of her hair broke off. And at her mercury
Whoa.
level, it was that her mercury
Wow.
level was so high. As
Wow.
we treated that, and she got mercury out of her diet, and we detoxed her hair all came back, and she didn't have to wear extensions anymore. So it is a
Wow.
reality that for some people we have huge responses, and it is a true issue. I want people to understand that the word detox is, very new agey and just kind of like, oh yeah, right. It is truly something that needs to happen for some people because we have and are bombarded with so many toxic issues in our lives.
Mm. Okay, so toxins, and there's the toxic 12 that you mentioned, and then
Yep.
there's also on that same website. I remember you telling me that there are certain things to look out for the plate things that we do put on our face. So there's
Exactly.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And what's the
Yep.
name of that website again for
It's
people
called
who?
the Environmental Working Group, and they're fantastic at providing information for you so that you can look at what is it that you need to do a little bit differently.
Okay, so women when they get my age, like I'm noticing my skin quality is not as good. I'm having issues with weight and sleep. And so is it the same kind of like okay, go back the chain of ideas. It could be stress levels. It could be what I'm eating. It could be my gut. Is that fair to say that?
Absolutely. That is very fair to say. And in menopause, the around age 51 or 52 for most women, what happens is the body starts to try to hoard estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
So the belly gets a little bit bigger, the hips get a little bit bigger. And
Mm,
as the body stabilizes, then that oftentimes goes away. It gets compounded, though, if you're not eating and exercising on a regular basis. But for some people, I talk about this notion of weight loss resistance. And that's when they're doing everything right. They've been taught over the years to do. They've cut the calories back. They're not eating sugar. They're exercising regularly, and they're still stuck. And that
mm-hmm.
was me for a long time.
Mm,
And what you understand is you have to look a little deeper than is it adrenals for that person? Is it thyroid for that person? Is it digestive for that person? Is it emotions for that person? What is going on in that environment, neurotransmitters? What is it happening for that particular person that's preventing her from losing that weight? And
mm,
I have just launched an amazing weight loss program in which I use a homeopathic
mm,
that is extremely successful for anybody along the way
mm-hmm.
because we now know more than we ever have before. Sometimes we need to just help the system a little bit with decreasing inflammation and doing some detox. And I have a homeopathic that I'm using that's very effective to do that. So I'm here to tell you that you absolutely don't have to believe this concept that you're getting older. Every year it's 5 pounds.
Right,
It's middle age spread.
right.
It's garbage. It does not have to happen, but we have to figure out what caused the problem.
Mm,
And sometimes I might not know because I've tested all those things, corrected all those things, and they still can't lose weight. So then I use the homeopathic with the food plan that I
mm.
use.
So I used to weigh 125 like from age 13 all the way to age 30. And then when I started like 30 to 35, I started gaining weight and then I had kids and then it was like 135 from 10 pounds extra, and I've been trying like crazy to get down to 125, And I'm wondering whether it's even a healthy objective,
Hmm.
like, because
Well,
I'm
how
no
tall are you?
longer, I'm 5'5".
Okay. So that's probably an unreal realistic objective.
Okay.
If I was 2,500, yours is probably more like 130, 135.
Yeah,
That's
that's what
probably
I
the
am.
top of the range. Yep.
Okay.
So that's probably great. So I would really encourage you to do more weight training and exercising, really toning things,
Right.
but then also being aware that adrenals and digestion and all those things can be a part of that puzzle.
Okay.
So, but if you have a little bit extra weight in the middle, that's a different story because if the weight's proportionate, then
Hmm.
that's probably normal for you. If it's
Yeah, so
not
so
proportionate,
then you could be older and require like you're just older, right? So trying to be 125 when I was age 13 and now I'm 55 to be 125 doesn't seem necessarily like a realistic goal
I mean, some
necessarily.
of it depends on your BMI, on how much muscle do you have and how much body fat, because there are people that are the normal weight and they are what I call skinny fat people. So some of it does depend upon how much muscle do you have versus how much fat do you have. And that's the
Um,
criteria that I look at in my office. I have something called a bioimpedance analysis, and I actually
mhm.
look at that in my office when I'm doing this weight loss program. So
Mhm.
I know, are they losing fat? Because that's what I want. I don't want them to lose muscle.
Okay, so it could be that I have gained muscle over the period of time.
Absolutely.
I've done a lot
Absolutely.
more weightlifting than I did when I
Yep,
was 25, so it could be
absolutely.
some of those pounds are related to just weight gain
Hands down. Muscle
from
weighs much
muscles.
more than fat. Yes.
Yeah, got
And
it.
if you're wearing pretty much the same size of clothes, then I
Yeah.
don't pay attention to the scale at all.
Oh,
I
that's
don't care about the
interesting.
scale.
Yeah, because I
If
have
the
been wearing
clothing
pretty much, yeah.
size is appropriate and it's about the same, and you can pretty much wear the same clothes you wore then, who cares which way?
I guess so. Yeah, I understand that. So in some ways, it's like proportion of fat and muscle.
And you probably are stronger and healthier than you were back then because you have more lean muscle that
Right.
burns more calories that also helps in the aging process.
Right. Okay. Got it. So I think I have what's interesting now is finding functional doctors like yourself or
Yeah,
functional medicine people. Where does one find a functional medicine person? I know
that's a good question.
if I'm a woman, I come to you and I can talk. It sounds like I can work with you online for like I'm a woman going through menopause. I talk to you. It sounds like you have a weight program. If I'm
Hmm.
having a weight issue, I could do an online class with you. So tell me all
Hmm.
the different options of working with you, and if I like in the case of my son who's younger, there's maybe specific people he could find.
Sure. So there's a couple of ways to do it. One is if you have very, very significant health issues, then there's the Institute of Functional Medicine, and you go to find a practitioner. And what I
Hmm.
would do is go on that site, find a practitioner locally for you, but find someone that's certified. So they've
Okay.
done all of the programs and they really know about functional medicine.
Okay.
For those people that want to work with me, then they can go to my website, marcellepick.com, and they can look up the Women to Women Healthcare Center, and they can then call the office and make a phone consult appointment if that works for them. So the goal here is for people to understand that if something's not working and they don't feel well, that we need to figure out what the problem is. And there are so many answers that we've not had before. I mean, I was floored this weekend at the research that's going on, even in just with regards to autoimmune disorders. And by changing the gut microbial environment, kids that don't have hair from alopecia because of autoimmunity, their hair is growing back. Oh my
Wow.
God. Oh my God.
Wow. Wow. Oh, thank you so much for being here. This was fascinating. We
Absolutely.
have
You're
Marcelle
welcome.
Pick here. She's written 3 books: The Core Balanced Diet, Is It Me or My Adrenals? Is It Me or My Hormones? Thank you
And
so
book
much.
number 4 will be out by next year, I hope.
Yay!
Yay.
All right. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.